Italian opera was at a dead end at the end of the 18th century. Opera seria had died, castrati were out of fashion, and the popular opera buffa did not have the substance for further development. It took the genius of one man to rise Italian opera like a phoenix from the ashes. Gioacchino Rossini succeeded in modernizing Italian opera on the foundation of bel canto and, together with Donizetti and Bellini, led bel canto to its golden age. However, at the young age of 37, he wrote his last opera. Who was Gioacchino Rossini and what places and people shaped him? A biographical approach to the century artist from Italy. Rossini is one of the few people who have been born on a February 29th. He was the only child of two musicians born in 1792 in Pesaro, in the midst of the troubled period of French Revolution. He spent his first 8 years in this central Italian town. In 1800, he left his native town with his parents and was to return 18 years later as an already famous 26-year-old man for a visit to inaugurate the teatro that bears his name. His birthplace can still be visited. It is now a small museum on 4 floors. Certain things still reveal the atmosphere of the late 18th century. The house's small kitchen, for example, is impressive. Rossini then came to Lugo, his father's native town, for 2 years at the age of 10. He learned to play the horn and the harpsichord. He had a beautiful soprano voice, and his uncle wanted him to be a castrato. Gioacchino was grateful to his mother all his life for sparing her son from surgery. Gioacchino was highly talented. He studied Mozart and Haydn diligently in the library of an acquaintance and wrote his first works in Lugo at the age of 12 with a few string quartets. He was 12-year-old when his family came to Bologna. The move was not voluntary. His father was a supporter of the revolution. He came there to escape the papal state, and his parents wanted to give their only child a good musical education. Gioacchino began to study music in Bologna, in this institution that still today has an excellent reputation as the Conservatorio. At the age of 18, Rossini decided to earn his living as a musician. The next 10 years were to be his Galley years, during which he wrote over 30 works for more than a dozen different theaters. Milan played a particularly important role, with 6 premieres. Among them were Gazzaladra and Il Turco in Italia. Although La Scala in Milan was still overshadowed by the prestigious theatres of Vienna, Naples and Paris, the most important thing was that he met Domenica Barbaia there. The latter was in charge of the entertainment center at La Scala. The Scala of Rossini's time must be imagined somewhat differently than we are used to nowadays. While music was certainly important, the social aspect of a visit was at least as important. Thus, the Teatro alla Scala also included a cafe, a pastry shop, a kitchen, and gambling rooms of a casino. The resourceful Domenico Barbaia was responsible for the latter. With the French coming to power in the Napoleonic years, gambling had been legalized, and the enterprising Barbaia turned La Scala into an entertainment center, with music, gastronomy, and gambling. In addition to Milan, Venice also played an important role. For Rossini, the lagoon city was the gateway to his career. He arrived in Venice at the age of 18 and wrote several comedic one-act plays for the small theatre. With the commissioned works for the Venetian Teatro San Moisè, Rossini was not yet 20 years old, developed a breathtaking pace into one of the leading opera composers. In this renowned theatre, for which Vivaldi had already written, he wrote several one-act operas in a short time. The theatre, centrally located, was already converted in 1820, and today a memorial plaque in the pretty little square still recalls the beginnings of Gioacchino Rossini's career. Already the first commissioned work, La Cambiale di Matrimonio, the libretto of which had been given to the 18-year-old by a family friend, was a success. The overture of the one-act Il Signor Bruschino achieved anecdotal fame, in which the second violins had to tap their bows rhythmically on their music stands several times, producing a delightful effect. However, the distinguished gentlemen at the music stands were too embarrassed by this effect of the 18-year-old schnotz and refused to perform the tapping noises, which caused a considerable uproar. Now, at the age of 21, he received a commission from the great Teatro alla Fenice and he made his final breakthrough with Tancredi. But it was the opera L'Italiana in Algeria that made the 21-year-old Rossini Italy's leading opera composer. Its music was novel, ravishing, and the ending of the first act may be considered the invention of slapstick comedy par excellence. This finale, with tempo increase, volume increase, and virtuoso voice leading, became famous under the name Rossini Crescendi. Now he left the Lagoon City for Naples. At the age of 21, Rossini had earned a formidable reputation in northern Italy, with Tancredi and Italiana in Algeria. The legendary impresario Barbiere was by then the impresario of the Neapolitan opera house San Carlo and the Teatro Fondo. Because the bloody restoration brought the Bourbons to power in Naples, with the opera-loving King Ferdinand, they lifted the ban on gambling, and the clever impresario Barbiere took the opportunity to make the Teatro San Carlo the largest gambling house in Naples. He brought Rossini from Venice and made him the main composer and artistic director of the Teatro San Carlo and the smaller Teatro Fondo, today's Mercadante. Incredibly, at only 20 years old, Rossini was offered the artistical directorship of perhaps the most prestigious theatre in Italy. While Rossini and the stars with their horrendous fees ensured full houses and many rich visitors, Barbiere earned a golden nose with the guests at the gambling tables, especially the roulette, newly imported from Paris, thrilled to Naples. Thus, one must imagine the Teatro San Carlo of the year 1815 as a gambling den and restaurant with an attached theatre with 2,000 seats. For the public, the opera was not a temple of musical devotion, but a busy social place. In 1816, a year after Rossini's arrival, the San Carlo burned down and the brilliant Barbiere managed to rebuild the theatre in its finest splendor within 12 months. For Rossini, it meant the opportunity to write regular works for a star ensemble, whose superstar was the prima donna assoluta Isabelle Colbran, and she was at the same time Barbiere's mistress, i.e., his superiors. Rossini thus accepted the job offer and subsequently wrote 9 operas for Naples, and took Isabelle Colbran as his mistress. Barbiere does not seem to have minded. His first opera at the San Carlo was Elizabeth, Queen of England. It starred the biggest stars of their time, Isabelle Colbran and Manuel Garcia. Rossini worked like a madman, writing for the other theatres on the side, leading the Teatro San Carlo to its first golden years of the 19th century. In 1822, he left Naples and married Isabelle Colbran in Bologna. What happened next was breathtaking. He had received a commission for an opera from Rome's Teatro Argentina. He accepted it and, at the age of 23, within a few weeks, wrote Barbiere di Siviglia, one of the greatest and most groundbreaking operatic works. The premiere was chaotic and flopped. Contributing to the failure may have been that Paisiello's previous work was well known and respected, and audiences were overwhelmed with Rossini's novel musical Hurricane. One of Rossini's greatest inventions, which he first used in Italiana in Algeria and then in Barbiere di Siviglia, is the so-called Rossini crescendo. One of these passages in Barbieres is Basilio's aria La calunnia è un venticello. The text of the aria sounds like the definition of a Rossini crescendo. It begins with a breeze and gradually increases into a musical hurricane until it ends with a firing of a cannon. The premiere was accompanied by grotesque events on stage. Among other things, one of the singers tripped over a trapdoor and fell on his face. During the finale, a cat suddenly appeared on stage. After being chased out, it came once again and jumped on the arms of one of the singers. The audience began to mew and spurred the animal on. The premiere became a fiasco, but by the third performance, Rossini was celebrated, and the first performance of Barbiere Siviglia at the Teatro Argentina was transfigured into a myth. A year later, Rossini came to Rome with another commissioned work, this time to the Teatro della Valle. It was Cenerentola and his most difficult opera to date. The tenor was nervous about the virtuoso arias with the high Cs. The baritone fears Rossini's invention of the presto sillabato, the rapid speech singing, and the leading lady has to manage a firework of ornaments, tone changes, and leaps in the final piece, Non più mesta, which were breathtaking. This piece is among the most demanding that has been written for a coloratura soprano. And the premiere? History repeats itself. The first performance was a failure, but soon the Romans are at Rossini's feet. Rossini's work spread like wildfire. He visited Vienna in 1822 and triggered a huge Rossini frenzy in the imperial city. Schubert wrote 2 overtures, and even Beethoven composed a small canon in honor of the Italian. Within a few weeks, 8 different operas by Rossini were given in about 60 performances, mainly in the Theater am Kärntnertor, to whose director the Italian Barbaia had been nominated shortly before. During this visit of Rossini to Vienna, there was also the legendary meeting with Beethoven, where the German is said to have congratulated him on the Barbiere, but advised him to stay with the comedies. Shortly thereafter, he married the famous mezzo-soprano Isabelle Colbran in a small circle in this beautiful Baroque church near Bologna. Rossini's father-in-law, Colbran, had purchased the property with a stately home outside of Bologna in Castenaso, which was the second home of Rossini and Colbran for a long time. He composed parts of Guglielmo Tell and Semiramide there, among other works. Unfortunately, the estate burned down during the Second World War, and today only a fountain reminds of this place. Rossini, now 30 years old, was invited to come to England and write an opera for London. His wife, the aging prima donna, was to sing. The visit of the two in 1823, however, remained artistically unproductive. Rossini did not fulfill his duties, and Colbran disappointed with her performances. The voice was already in decline. Rossini took advantage of the time to make a side trip to Brighton, where he met the king in the spectacular pavilion. The highlight of the trip to England was the invitation of the art-loving George IV to visit him in his gigantic Oriental Pleasure Pavilion at the seaside resort of Brighton, which had just been built. In the spectacular great music hall with its Chinese decor, Rossini sang Figaro, among other roles, and the king sang in front of an assembled audience. Nevertheless, the nobility went crazy for Rossini. The ladies and gentlemen of high English society were willing to pay any price imaginable for singing lessons, small performances, etc. And the newly married Rossini couple could really cash in England. After 5 months, the spook was over and Rossini never came back to England. The 32-year-old Rossini took up the post of director of the Théâtre Lyrique in Paris in 1824. He wrote 3 operas for Paris in the next 5 years, including Guillaume Tell in 1829, which remained his last opera and is considered one of the first great operas of the Grand Opéra. Why he did not compose any more after William Tell remains obscure to this day. It was probably his failing health that caused him to suffer from depression. He suffered from progressive gonorrhea. Or was it creative exhaustion after years of excessive productivity? Or did he believe that his music no longer fit the times? Colbran had come to Paris with Rossini. After the end of her singing career, however, Colbran became erratic and fell into a gambling addiction. In 1829, Rossini brought his wife back to Bologna, where she would henceforth live with Rossini's parents. In letters, Rossini's father complained several times to his son, who was living in Paris, about Isabel's diva-like behavior. But Gioacchino had already become estranged from her and separated from Colbran, who was 7 years older. He saw her only very sporadically. In 1845 she died and found her resting place in Bologna in the monumental Certosa cemetery. Rossini spent time again in Bologna, having taken an office in Bologna in 1836 that brought him back occasionally. The highlight was the performance of his Stabat Mater at the magnificent Archiginnasio. This memorable performance was conducted by none other than Gaetano Donizetti. But after the death of Colbran, Rossini left Bologna for good, this time in anger. He was accused by some people of not supporting the Risorgimento, which infuriated him. On the evening of September 17th, 1831, an earthquake in opera occurred in the Teatro del Giglio in Lucca. The French tenor Gilbert Dupré sang the first C from chest, the so-called ut en poitrine, in Rossini's William Tell. Until now, the norm was to sing these top notes from the falsetto. When Rossini heard this sound for the first time, he is said to have been repulsed, saying, "It sounds like the cry of a capon having its throat cut." In the caricature, you can see Dupré's distended chest and widened eyes as he sings the high Cs. After Tell, Rossini was in negotiation with the Grand Opera. A contract for 10 years was in the offing, during which Rossini was to deliver 4 works and receive a considerable lifelong pension in return. However, due to a financial crisis of the state budget triggered by the July Revolution, these plans evaporated after a lengthy legal dispute. Rossini subsequently commuted between Paris and Bologna, and in 1832 met Olympe Bellissier, a veteran salon courtesan 7 years his junior in Paris. She had to stand on her own 2 feet early on and chose the path as a lover of wealthy men. They began a relationship in 1832. However, the following Paris years were marred by Rossini's health problems, which caused him chronic pain. More about this later in the section on his spa days. The famous Samedi Soir, Rossini's musical salon, where all the musical celebrities met to take music, listen, and discuss, took place at this venue. The events, organized by Rossini's second wife Olympe, saw regular guests such as Saint-Saëns, Aubert, Meyerbeer, Gounod, Bizet, Liszt, and others. Rossini also composed small occasional works for these occasions, his so-called péchés de vieillesse, sins of old age, with which he occasionally poked fun at his guests. In March 1860, a special spectacle took place at this address. The 47-year-old Richard Wagner visited the 68-year-old Rossini. Michotte, Rossini's adlatus, carefully noted the content of the conversation. He reported that most of the conversation revolved around the reform of European opera. From this, a small anecdote. Richard Wagner, who was not a Rossini devotee, praised Rossini's apple-shot scene from Guillaume Tell most highly. Wagner advocated declamation as the music of the future, while Rossini advocated melody. Wagner cleverly cited Rossini's Sois mobile from his Tell as an example. To this, Rossini said with a smile, "So this is how I wrote music for the future without knowing it." Rossini thus had the status of an influential elder statesman. His gourmandism also became legendary. Many dishes were named after him, and, accordingly, Rossini's corpulence steadily increased. The Maison Dorée restaurant was a famous and expensive restaurant on the Boulevard des Italiens. Rossini was a frequent guest, and the chef Casimir Moissan created here the dish Tournedo Rossini for the gourmet Rossini at his suggestion. Escoffier later immortalized it in his famous Guide culinaire. Rossini's medical record at the end of his life was very thick. The root cause of his many ailments was gonorrhea, which he contracted relatively early. From the age of 35, the ailments became increasingly chronic and sometimes very painful. This included abdominal complaints, bronchitis, and heart weaknesses, which were aggravated by obesity. Rossini probably suffered from severe depression and suicidal thoughts as a result of the pain. In order to find relief from his pain, Rossini often went to health cures. He lived in a villa on the edge of Passy Park in the 16th arrondissement during the summer months from 1857. He died in 1868 at his home in Passy as a result of surgery for rectal cancer. He was given an honorary grave in the Père Lachaise cemetery. Rossini's body was buried in the cemetery in Paris after a solemn funeral. His grave of honor is located in Division 4. In May 1887, his remains were transferred to Florence. However, the young Italian state, for propaganda reasons, 20 years after his death, wanted to bring the famous son home, and the body was transferred from the Père Lachaise cemetery in Paris. Since then, he rests in the church Santa Croce, the Italian Parthenon, where also the famous Machiavelli, Michelangelo, Galileo, and many others lie. Francesco of Assisi is said to have laid the foundation stone of this church. The funerary monument is made of marble stone and decorated with gold. It shows Italy in mourning, personified by a woman.